So over the past couple 1 to 2 years, well, the media has really done a great job of, in my opinion, lying to the public about inflation, or at the very least trying to control the public perception of it by using manipulative language and data while leaving out other important information. But with March numbers just released this past week showing that inflation continues to get worse even by their own standards, well, I don't think that it'll be so easy for them to continue getting away with it. And in today's video, I'm going to expose how they've been manipulating the public and provide you with the actual data based on facts and the truth that they don't want you to see. And I'll even share my own thoughts and opinions on the economy and the stock market and where we may be headed in the future too, considering what a disaster our economy has been these past couple years with inflation getting worse all of the time. And yet if you only listen to the media these past couple years, you might actually think that everything has only been getting better. Take some of these reports, for example. AP News, what's pushing inflation down? Look at all those clearance sales, sweet. Morningstar, we expect inflation to fall. And further down, inflation fell sharply in 2023. AP News again, US inflation has steadily cooled. Look at all those happy shoppers. The Hill, inflation is down, guys. CBS, inflation is slowing. Really? Why won't you believe us? NPR, inflation has cooled like a lot. Come on, guys. The Harvard Gazette around Thanksgiving time will gather together even if everything just seems expensive. And further down, don't worry, guys. Economists explain why Americans feel inflation and the economy are much worse than they actually are. Those idiot Americans, why can't they just understand that everything is great right now? US News, inflation continues to decline. Don't you see all those sale signs? PBS, US inflation is on the downhill. Look at all those cheap yogurts back there. CNN, yes, guys, inflation is coming down. Egg prices see historic decline. CNN again, inflation is coming down and no longer outweighing American wages. Don't you see all those amazing Black Friday Barbie deals? I mean, you get a Barbie, you get a Barbie, everyone gets a Barbie. ABC, inflation cooled significantly, offering relief for consumers. Oh man, thank goodness. I was getting a little worried there, but ABC says that we're all getting relief. VOA, U.S. economy shows continued strength as inflation falls. Awesome. Reuters, U.S. inflation decelerating in boost to economy. U.S. News, inflation falls. Fed may be winning the battle against higher prices. Awesome. AP again, U.S. inflation hits lowest point as prices ease for gas, groceries, and cars. NPR, inflation loses its punch and things could even get better. Yes, Financial Times, falling inflation boosts stocks. Woohoo! NPR, though unemployment is low and inflation is cooling, consumers still feel strain. Ugh, those idiot consumers again, they just don't get it. The Guardian with fearless and factual news. Food inflation falls to pre-Ukraine war levels. See guys, it's like the pandemic and all the foreign wars never even happened. Everything is great. Don't worry about all the money we printed and stole from taxpayers. ABC, inflation is falling, but these Biden voters still say it doesn't feel like it's gotten better. Ugh. Those pesky voters, why won't they just believe whatever we tell them? USA Today, inflation falling sharply. Financial Times, US inflation falls to lowest level. Bloomberg, White House says inflation poised for a steady drop. And US inflation set to fade in 2024. Goods prices keep falling. See guys, everything is great. Prices are falling. They're actually coming down. There's deflation taking place, right? Anyway, all the money that we printed and all the taxpayer money that we continue to waste, it doesn't matter because it's all in your head. Things just keep getting cheaper, guys. But are they really? The answer, of course, is no. And granted, these articles aren't 100% completely wrong or completely lying in a way. It's just that they use certain wording, like saying inflation instead of what they really mean, which is the inflation rate. But of course, we all know that inflation is cumulative, meaning that inflation as a whole is not coming down. Prices are not coming down. There's no deflation taking place. Ever since the pandemic, things have only been getting worse and worse every single year. And I have the actual true data to prove it based on facts, not manipulative rhetoric. So let me show you the real inflation and the real pain and struggle that consumers are actually facing. Well, here's the inflation rate, which, yeah, sure, the year over year rate is actually coming down. In fact, from the 2022 high of over 9%. We've now fallen to just around 3.5% last month, which is much closer to the Fed's target rate of around 2%. But a couple problems with that. First of all, even after the drop, it's still at one of the highest levels of not just the past decade, but even mostly since the early 90s too. And to make matters worse, last month actually saw the second month in a row of an increasing inflation rate, going from 3.1% in January to 3.2% in February to now 3.5% in March. So it's actually getting worse, even by their own standards of just looking at the rate alone. And again, inflation is cumulative, meaning that prices have only gotten worse every single year. In fact, last year in March, we had a 5% increase with another 3.5% added on top of that this March too. And this right here is the chart that really all the media just loves to hide from you guys, because it shows how much prices are actually climbing over time as a whole, showing actual true inflation. And I'll break some of this down for you guys so that's easier to understand, which the media should really be doing too if they had any kind of like shred of integrity or morals or ethics. But take around 2014, for example, the consumer price index was hovering around 240. Then it reached about 250 in 2019, which means for the 5 years before the pandemic, we actually had inflation of only around 10 points or 4%. But in the 5 years after, we skyrocketed to 310 points, which equaled an increase of a whopping 60 points or around 24%, meaning your prices on average rose by nearly a quarter of its value. And by the way, some parts of the economy have been hit even much harder than that. Take eggs, for example, a common food staple. The price of a dozen eggs on average rose by around 500% since 2019. Lumber, which is a common building staple, well, it rose by 80%. Copper, which is used for manufacturing and many other things, rose by 90%. Crude oil, which is used for transportation, heating, making plastics, and many other things, it rose by 63%. And we even saw the price of rent and shelter rise by 24%, while houses rose by 57% too. I mean, here's even an article from Redfin saying that Americans are having to skip meals and work overtime just to pay their rents. I mean, it's pretty crazy how bad it's gotten. And so how has the government and the Fed responded to all of these issues in our deteriorating economy? Well, for starters, I mean, most of that was actually caused by them because of shutting down the economy during the pandemic and printing unbelievable amounts of money. In fact, just for the pepperoni alone, they allocated many trillions of dollars, which has already surpassed all the spending that we did in our 13 largest wars in history combined. How crazy is that? And when you look at some of these charts here, which again, the media will likely never show you any of this, but the Fed's balance sheet more than doubled since the pandemic, absolutely mind-blowing. Our currency in circulation rose by 30%, and our M2 money supply rose by another 35% too. And so all of that was really instrumental in destroying our economy and sending inflation soaring, which they are now trying to solve with sky-high interest rates and by raising the minimum wage across the board, which I hate to break it to you guys, but when you have to raise minimum wages because nobody can afford anything, it actually ends up hurting the economy even more. And I'll show you, I mean, just take a look at some of this. So interest rates, for example, they've now skyrocketed to the highest levels in over a decade, and it may stay there even longer than expected given the recent spike in our inflation rate. But what this does is it makes it more expensive to borrow money, which tends to cool down spending, and the idea is to ease inflation because of it. But of course, it also means slowing down the economy, which affects both businesses from small to large as well as consumers, given the massive levels of debt that everyone is carrying these days. Here's just credit card debt alone, and you can see that gigantic spike that we've had over the past couple years to a new record high because nobody can afford anything, and so they're taking on massive debt. And so how is the government and our leaders, what is their plan to really get us out of any of this mess? Well, they'll just keep raising minimum wages. That should solve everything, right? Here's a chart of hourly wages. And once again, you can see another giant spike in the past couple years, which is completely abnormal. It's not normal for this to happen. In fact, in the 4 years before the pandemic, wages only rose by $2. But after, it soared by more than 3 times the amount. That's like a 250% increase. And in some places like California, you even see the minimum wage for fast food workers up to $20 an hour, which, you know what the result of all of that is? Rising prices by even more, even with our already high inflation, and they're laying off workers left and right, with small business optimism also hitting the lowest level in over a decade, citing inflation and high costs related to input and labor as their biggest concerns. And look, I know that my take on this isn't going to be a very popular one these days, but in my defense, I just think that a lot of the public has been sort of tricked into believing that raising the minimum wage is a good way of solving our inflation problems. But I would argue that it's actually a horrible solution. Now, I'm not saying to never raise wages. I just think that it should be in line with a healthy level of inflation. If there is a little bit of inflation going on, wages can rise to match some of that. But when you have skyrocketing inflation to absolutely insane levels, the solution needs to be to bring prices down, not raise minimum wages to try to match it, which never even does, by the way. It never really matches it. It's more of a trick just to kind of buy votes for politicians to make them think that they're actually doing something, which they're really not, because the biggest problem with it is that a lot of people think that the corporations are the ones that are going to eat the cost, but that's not true. It's actually you guys, so all of us that are going to end up paying for those higher wages, because the companies will just end up raising their prices for their products and services even higher, even with inflation as crazy as it is. So we end up paying for all of that. And at the same time, they also lay off a lot of workers too, which ends up hurting the working class as well. I remember I actually learned a lot of this at a young age, because as a kid, I would ask my mom. She's probably the hardest worker I've ever known in my life. So I really trust her opinion when it comes to just the real world economy and what it actually is out there. My mom, she's like an angel sent from God, in my opinion, because we migrated from South America. We came to the United States. As a single parent, she brought us over 5 children, 4 boys and a girl. Imagine having to raise 4 boys when you're just a single mother. Anyway, she would work multiple jobs. She would take a public bus at 1 a.m. to work graveyard shifts. I would rarely ever see her because she was always at work. And then even me and my siblings, we would have to work at the local swap meet at very young ages that I probably shouldn't get into for legal reasons, but yeah, at ages that you probably shouldn't be working. And we were all in poverty. I mean, we really started at the very bottom, worked our way up. I just recently became a US citizen a few years ago, but we worked our way up from the very bottom. So we all kind of knew about hard work. We've all worked minimum wage jobs and all that kind of stuff. But I remember I used to ask my mom, what do you think about raising the minimum wage? Is that a good thing? Does that help the economy? Does that help people? This is before my college years and all that. But anyway, I would ask her about that. And she wasn't the biggest fan of it, because she would say that, she worked her way up in a company. Eventually, she got a job at a laboratory, really worked her way up into at least somewhat of a decent income where she could, afford the rent and stuff. And what ended up happening is that whenever they would raise the minimum wage, not only would it usually damage the economy, but also the company would start laying off workers. They had to pay more for new employees coming in. A lot of times they were younger workers straight out of high school or college, whereas the older workers who maybe had families, had mortgages to pay, they had debt maybe from their college years, all kinds of things that they need to pay for. Well, a lot of them would, maybe get laid off, or there'd be no raises for them, no bonuses, so their income would not be as great. So it kind of just ended up hurting everyone, because even the poor class who makes the minimum wage, well, now they have to pay higher costs for everything. There's also less opportunity if they're kind of laying off people and not hiring as much. And then the middle class also gets destroyed too, because when you raise the minimum wage, you don't also raise the wage for people who have worked in a company for a long time and worked their way up to higher income. They don't raise the wages for them too. So it kind of just screws up everything for everyone. It damages the economy. And really the only people that benefit from it, or that I guess come out relatively unscathed, is the rich class and the elite politicians who trick everyone into voting for them and giving them power, making them think that they're actually doing something when they're really not. It's kind of just putting a Band-Aid over like a gunshot wound, saying that you're just going to raise minimum wage to combat inflation when that's not really solving the problem. And not to mention even small businesses too that are already working with very tight margins. You raise minimum wage, it's going to hurt them too and make it harder for them to compete with giant corporations. So there's a lot of things that we could talk about here. I don't want to get too deep into it. I've probably already upset a few people because I know that a lot of people support raising minimum wages. And again, I'm not against it. I think it should be done when inflation is at a healthy level, but currently we're not in a healthy level. And so what you really need to do is bring down prices. That's really what you have to do. And in order to do that, you're going to have higher interest rates for longer than we would like to see. And of course, the issue with that is that it could also lead to more economic pain, at least in the short term, which means that a recession is definitely not off the table, at least for now. And we probably should have had one a long time ago instead of just kind of shutting down the economy and printing insane amounts of money that, again, acted more like a band-aid over a gunshot wound instead of actually fixing inflation in the first place, which we're now having to do with high interest rates, unfortunately. But in terms of where I see things heading in the future, well, when looking at the stock market, I mean, it's trading at near record highs. I strongly believe that we're going to see a lot of volatility in the market going forward, with perhaps a correction or maybe even a crash at some point too. Obviously, that's all speculation. Nobody can accurately predict these things, especially in the short term, which is why I stick to long-term investing. But to be honest, I would actually welcome a correction at this point because I'm getting a little tired of seeing so many stocks trading near record highs, and I would love to get some cheaper prices. I'm still investing regardless because my goal is to build as large of a stock portfolio as possible for my future. But at the same time, I'm only investing with money that I don't immediately need. And I'm focusing on my career, making sure that I can survive any economic downturn, which is what I think everybody should be doing as their number one priority at the moment. And I'm also trying to save cash too outside of the market, just in case the market does fall. I need to go in and buy much heavier on the dip as well. So there's a combination of different things that I'm trying to do here. Because while I am still a long-term optimist about America and the stock market, I also have to be realistic about the current situation that we're in right now, which is a very scary and rocky one at best. And I just want to leave you guys with one more media report here just to kind of summarize how corrupt and manipulative I feel that our leaders and the media is when it comes to the economy. And this one here is from Vox. And it says, deflation is probably not in the cards, and the rub is that we don't want it to be. Higher prices might just be the sort of thing we've all got to get used to. The truth is, we're never going back to how things were in 2019. That night out on the town is gonna just cost us more than it did before. So it's all good, guys. We don't want lower prices. We want higher prices. We want higher rent, higher housing, higher debt, high interest rates, and we'll afford it all with some higher minimum wages because everything is great. It's all in your head. Anyway, I'll catch you guys in the next time. I hope you're all doing well out there, and we'll see what happens. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for all the support. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.